Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Spirits of Independence. I'm Thomas Watson, and this big fella is my travel companion and good friend, Bob Moldenhauer. When our last show ended, the two of us had just experienced one of the true highlights of the entire trip when we visited the Talos at Mount Airy and were greeted by their herd of cattle. This episode will feature Bob and I finishing our sights in Virginia before we cross the Potomac River and into Maryland. Once again, the heat was relentless, but we pushed on, visiting the graves of three more signers on the sixth day of the trip. So without further delay, please sit back and enjoy the show. Like most mornings, the two of us were up at precisely 6 a.m. After Bob grabbed a coffee at 7-Eleven, we were on the road to Carter Braxton's Chericoke. As the crow flies, it wasn't extremely far from our motel to Chericoke, but road-wise, there didn't seem to be an easy or direct route. In fact, it seemed as though we drove all over King William County, and even though we got lost a couple of times, we still arrived at the home of signer Carter Braxton just before 8 a.m. After Bob parked the car, we talked to a couple of grounds workers, one of which went inside the house to speak with the owner about our unexpected visit. Luckily, we had the owner's blessing and we were good to go.
Well, we're arriving about 7:58 a.m.
How far do you want? There's a guy outside right over there.
Is there?
How far do you want to go in? Just all the way, or?
No, I just pull in out here, I think. Oh, that's it. That definitely is it. Good memory. Now we're going up to the driveway to Chericoke. Haven't seen anybody that resembles the owners, but we did see a few workers go by. Seem very friendly. Okay, this is the little small family cemetery at Chericoke, in which we cannot find anything resembling Carter Braxton's grave. And it's located about that far from the main house itself.
Well, when we talk to the lady that lives here, she might be able to enrich us on the possibilities.
Now, this is Chericoke, former home of Carter Braxton. That's where we're parked, way out there. We're gonna look at that sign in a few minutes. Now we can see down the farmyard and the Pamunkey River.
Jesus Christ, you don't want me to take this picture, do you?
Well, this is our final glimpse at the home of Carter Braxton.
Carter Braxton was a member of the House of Burgesses and a delegate representing Virginia in the Continental Congress from February to August of 1776. Braxton was the most conservative of the 7 Virginia signers and originally opposed independence, but yielded to the majority and signed the Declaration on August 2nd, 1776. In 2 marriages, Braxton fathered a total of 16 children, more than any other signer. Perhaps Carter should have been called the father of our country. Before the Revolution, Braxton was one of the wealthiest men in Virginia, but the war took its toll on his fortune. During the Revolutionary War, all of Braxton's shipping vessels were sunk and his 2 plantations were ravaged. Carter Braxton died in Richmond, Virginia at the age of 61 on October 10, 1797. Today, it's believed Braxton's remains were transported back to Cherico, where he was laid to rest in a small burial ground adjacent to the home. However, when the family graves in that small plot were moved to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond in 1910, the signer's grave could not be located. Bob and I walked to the small family burial ground and saw 2 headstones without any markings whatsoever. Was this the actual burial place of Carter Braxton? On a previous trip to Chericoke a few years earlier, one of the workers there told me Braxton was traveling from Richmond to his home when he died and was buried along the route, not on the grounds of Chericoke. However, our National Park Service reference book stated he was buried next to Chericoke following his death. Bob and I were totally confused. After capturing some photos near the 2 headstones, Bob and I walked up to the main house where we posed with our documents. After all, we knew Braxton had built and lived in Chericoke from 1767, and it served as his primary residence until 1789 with his second wife, Elizabeth. Not knowing for sure where Braxton's grave was located, Chericoke served as the official background for our quest. Our visit to the home and the possible final resting place of signer Carter Braxton marked the 15th gravesite of our trip, with only 41 left to visit. With our documents in hand, Bob and I returned to the Omni, which had become an oven on wheels in the morning's extreme heat. Our next site on the agenda was scheduled to be the final resting place of signer Richard Henry Lee, who was buried in the Lee family plot not too far from Hague, Virginia, which was roughly a 75-mile drive from Chericoke. Our route took us northeast past Mount Airy, through Warsaw, and onward to Hague, which we found without any issues thanks to our trusty Rand McNally atlas. But once we got outside of Hague, Bob and I quickly got lost. It seemed like all of the back roads in the northern neck of Virginia all looked alike. Once again, the 2 of us were forced to ask for directions, and thankfully we found an elderly mailman who seemed to appear out of nowhere. Bob and I laughed because we knew he had been sent there to help us by our guiding spirits of independence.
Goes in there, so it'll be the first road on your right.
Okay.
About, I'd say 2 miles from there.
So we go to this one, turn right. Well, it dead ends, doesn't it, on that one?
It goes on up to 202.
Okay. Okay, so the first,
I'm not sure.
I saw a plaque down there at that intersection and it said a mile and a half this way.
That's right. What you see, the road is kind of hidden there in the woods.
Uh-huh.
If you go here and turn right, then be very careful and take the first road to your right.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
We're going to be excruciatingly careful.
Okay, we're back on 612. And we're looking for our first road. That's the driveway.
Emergency flashes on it. So slow.
He said something about a woods, didn't he?
Not sure.
Somebody behind you?
No, I just have them on just in case somebody's coming up at 55.
We're turning right on 675. Road ends in 0.84 miles. Private road, keep out, it says. But I didn't see that.
I didn't.
Private property, no trespass.
No, he said it's a county, or did he say it wasn't a county road? I thought he said it's a county road, so we can go on it. Obviously he's not. Correct.
We're looking for it, we're looking, but so far we've come up with zilch. The farm up here, this is probably the farm. Something back there. No, that's nothing.
I hope we don't have to walk through another cow field to get to it.
Really?
One would think a cemetery would be fairly easily spotted. And after seeing yesterday's,
Yeah.
this fence is right at eye level.
Yeah. I got a feeling we're gonna be seeing something. Yeah.
Might be a thing for us right up here. I'd be kind of nifty.
There it is.
Oh, that's
Birdhouse Field. There's no trespassing, but once again, yeah. Why would they have a sign there?
It's probably more for hunters.
Yeah, I imagine that's what it exactly is.
'Cause it looks like they want the public to be able to have access to it. I think that's what there's an odd looking critter.
Not really sure what that was. And I tell you what, we thought the other one was out in the middle of nowhere. This one takes the cake. This is going to be looking straight down in the grave of Richard Henry Lee. A panoramic view. Right here is the grave of Thomas Lee, who is the father of Richard Henry, Francis Lightfoot, and Robert E. Lee. One last look at the gravesite of Richard Henry Lee.
Richard Henry Lee was a member of the House of Burgesses, a Virginia delegate to the Continental Congress from 1774 to 1779, a United States Senator, and the sixth President of Congress. On June 7, 1776, Lee put forth the motion to the Continental Congress to declare independence from Great Britain. Lee was an outspoken advocate against the U.S. Constitution, and although he lost that fight, Richard Henry was instrumental in the ratification of the Bill of Rights. Due to a family illness, Lee was not in Philadelphia during the independence vote on July 4th. However, the fiery orator was present to sign the Declaration with his brother, Francis Lightfoot Lee, on August 2nd, 1776. Signer Richard Henry Lee died on June 19, 1794 at his home, Chantilly, in Westmoreland County, Virginia at the age of 62. The signer was laid to rest in the Lee family graveyard called Burnt House Field Cemetery, which is pictured behind us. This cemetery is located on the original grounds of Thomas Lee's plantation known as Machotic, which burned down in 1729. The brick walls of the burial ground stuck up above the amber waves of grain, and it seemed out of place in the middle of nowhere. As Bob drove the Omni closer to the brick fortress, we saw an iron gate at the entrance, and we hoped it wasn't locked. Had the gate been locked, however, the two of us discussed the idea of parking the car as close as possible to the wall and using it to climb into the enclosure. I, for one, am glad that never happened because I'm not sure how we would have gotten back out. The entire brick enclosure was roughly 25 feet square with 5-foot high walls. Richard Henry Lee's marker appeared to be made of white marble and was somewhat weathered. To get a better view of the signer's grave, the two of us climbed to the top of the nearest wall where we captured aerial photos. During this stunt, I was extremely nervous for two reasons. First, had I lost my balance and fell, I would have either landed on the brick surface on the inside or the hard clay of the ground outside. And second, had I dropped the video camera or my 35mm film camera while trying to negotiate the top of the wall, it would have been disastrous for the complete success of the trip. As it was, the jump back down onto the brick surface gave my knees a true stress test. As we stood and paid tribute to one of the instrumental signers of the Declaration of Independence, it seemed as though we could hear Richard Henry Lee's resolution he delivered before Congress on June 7, 1776. Resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. Of all the signers, Richard Henry Lee was possibly the least appreciated, and should be mentioned in the same breath with the likes of Jefferson, Adams, Hancock, and Franklin. Lee's grave was the 16th signer's gravesite on our trip, with only 40 left to visit. It was still early morning, and the temperature was climbing as we drove away from the Burnt House Field Cemetery. We were only 10 miles from our next scheduled stop, which was one of the most historical homes in all of America, Stratford Hall, the boyhood home of signers Francis Lightfoot and Richard Henry Lee, and the birthplace of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Unlike our last stop, Stratford Hall was easy to find. Unfortunately, it cost each of us $10 to enter the property, and this time there was no way of sneaking in. Although the narrow, winding road to the parking area seemed never-ending, we were rewarded with shaded areas once Bob and I had arrived.
Boy, they're not even gonna let you in the gate until you have fork out. Okay, 5. Let's go.
Good morning. How y'all doing today?
Hi.
Two.
Well, it's in the middle of a wide open field. Oh, another polite Virginia gentleman.
Yeah, the people of the South are definitely polite. There's probably over there. It's about 20 miles an hour. Going into the sun.
I'm sorry, I didn't even hear it. How far did he say ahead we had to go here?
I wasn't sure.
I thought he... Oh, a little ways. Now, is that where we're supposed to go? That's a dining room.
I think maybe left. He said something about left.
They should have like visitor parking. That would really help me out a lot.
Yeah. I see a flag over there. That's probably it. I see cars parked over there.
Okay.
While I'm looking for cars in the place, I'm probably videotaping the dashboard.
All right, we can park in the shade. That was almost as important to me as seeing this house.
This is Stratford Hall, birthplace of Robert E. Lee, boyhood homes of Richard Henry and Francis Lightfoot Lee.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, welcome to Stratford Hall Plantation, home of Robert E. Lee, born in 1807. Is that enough?
Yep, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is in the front yard at Stratford Hall. See the view of the Potomac they had? On this hot and hazy day. Barely see it. Now I'm going to pan around the front yard. Yeah, it's right into the sun as usual. Now let's go up to the front porch at Stratford Hall. We're now in the backyard. Supposed to get up to 105 degrees today. This is the kitchen area where Mongo and I got free cookies and apple juice.
I've been doing it for a year now, so all I can do it in my sleep. Okay, this is the dining room closet.
Oh, I see him.
It's 18
I'm sorry.
Stratford Hall was built in 1725 by Thomas Lee and was the birthplace of signer Richard Henry Lee on January 20th, 1732, and his brother and fellow signer Francis Lightfoot Lee on October 14th, 1734. The signer's first cousin, Confederate General Robert E. Lee, was also born at Stratford Hall on January 19th, 1807. All three of the famous Lees were born in the chamber located directly behind me in this image. After Bob and I toured the grounds and photographed the exterior of the historic home, we took a tour of the interior, which was spectacular to say the least. However, photography of any kind was prohibited inside the mansion, although I did manage to capture some candid video in the birth chamber, although I had to be very discreet so as not to get caught and get yelled at. Even though we saw the bed where Robert E. Lee was born, it was the Great Hall that stole the show. The entire house is shaped like a giant letter H, and in the center was the Great Hall, which featured elaborate panels and a 17-foot high ceiling. Stratford Hall's Great Hall is arguably one of the most architecturally significant rooms to survive from colonial America. Back in the Omni, which was still in the shade, Bob and I headed north and crossed the Potomac River into Maryland at 1:43 p.m. Once we had crossed the river, we had roughly a 15-mile drive to reach Port Tobacco and the home and gravesite of signer Thomas Stone.
There it is. That's how hot it is right today that we're in La Plata, Maryland, about 2 miles from Port Tobacco.
What a mighty fine looking vehicle. This car's heating up fast again, damn it.
Yeah, what kind of gas prices we have? Well, this thing really went out of focus.
Come on, lady, move that thing. Jeez. Come on, Grandma, get going.
As you can see, we went too damn far.
If we can drive to that far. Doesn't look like it.
Well, we'll go up here anyway.
Doesn't look like there's anybody here. If anybody tries to stop us from going out there, I think there'll be a problem.
Yeah, I agree. Yep, Thomas Stone. This is definitely it.
Park this critter in the shade and cruise out there. He's up there explaining what we're doing to the other guy.
Okay, we're looking at Hybrid Adventure, home of Thomas Stone, being restored because of burning a fire in 1979. And as we scan, we will see where he is buried, way out in the back 40. This is what?
Hybrid Adventure.
And what year did it burn down?
1972, I believe.
72?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is the front of Hybrid Adventure. You hear a tractor in my background.
It'll be interesting to come back here and see the improvement that is made on it. And
I'm going to take a look inside, if we can.
Thomas Stone was a lawyer, a Maryland delegate to the Continental Congress from 1775 to 1778, and then again in 1783 as chairman. Although Stone was on the committee that framed the Articles of Confederation, he never signed that historic document. Stone, along with Carter Braxton, George Read, and Edward Rutledge, favored reconciliation with England rather than fight for independence. However, he did join the majority and voted for independence on the 4th of July. Thomas Stone was a poor speaker and preferred to stay in the background during most of his political career. Thomas Stone died at the age of 44 on October 5, 1787, in Alexandria, Virginia. The Stone family cemetery was about 30 feet square and was surrounded by an iron fence. There were about a dozen headstones scattered throughout the small burial ground. The original tombstone that marked Thomas Stone's grave was severely weathered, which made the inscription very difficult to read. While the signer was in Philadelphia, Stone's wife, Margaret, visited him during a smallpox epidemic. Although Margaret was inoculated for the disease, she had an adverse reaction to the treatment. Margaret's health declined for the rest of her life. As Margaret's health grew worse, the signer withdrew from public life. When she died on June 3, 1787, at the age of 36, Thomas became depressed and died less than 4 months later, reportedly of a broken heart. Thomas Stone's final resting place became the 17th signer's grave on our trip, which meant we had only 39 left to visit. Finished at the burial ground, Bob and I hiked through a field to take a closer look at Hobart Adventure, the home of Thomas Stone. Built by the signer in 1771, Hobart Adventure was gutted by a fire on January 1, 1977. Renovation work began in 1981 and was ongoing during our visit. As we peered through the steel mesh-covered windows, we easily saw pieces of wood and other building materials stacked inside the historic home. The 1.5-story central house was connected to wings by 2 passageways, or hyphens, and was constructed over an elevated basement. While there, Bob and I didn't ask the workers when the reconstruction project was scheduled to be completed, but we figured it wouldn't be for quite some time. The hottest part of the day was upon us when we departed the Thomas Stone Historic Site and headed for Annapolis, Maryland, which was only 50 miles away. Once inside Maryland's capital city, Bob and I headed directly to the home of signer William Paca. We got lucky. There was a shaded parking spot very close to the historic home. Our luck wasn't limited to the shaded parking either. When Bob and I walked up to the historic Paca home, we saw a sign that stated entrance to the home and gardens was free. For the remainder of the day, following our visit to the Paca home, Bob and I saw a handful of other sites in Annapolis, including the Chase Lloyd House, the Maryland State House, and the Charles Carroll House. And then, just before we left town to find a place to stay for the night near Baltimore, Bob and I found ourselves engaged in a conversation with 2 Annapolis policemen. Funny thing was, one of the cops looked exactly like actor Carroll O'Connor when he played on the TV show In the Heat of the Night, which ran for 7 seasons from 1987 to 1994. Please enjoy our time in Annapolis.
Here we are in the gardens of William Paca's house in Annapolis, Maryland. And there is the house. The view from the front porch of William Pecos' house. Okay, this is the back of, across the street from the William Pecos house. I got an excellent parking spot right there, right in front of the house. And we look, kind of a cool looking tree. And this is the back side of William Pecos house. Just learned how to say that correctly today. I always thought it was Paca, it's Pecos.
You're all set up and button.
No. Here's the home signer, Samuel Chase. Here we are waiting to get a good picture without people in it of the Chase Lloyd house, the home of Samuel Chase. And this guy comes up to do some work on it. Isn't that just lovely? That's where the idiot parked, ran up. And this room right here is the room that Francis Scott Key was married in, according to our painter friend. Did you say that Francis Scott Key got married in this house?
Yep, in that room. Married, I forget her first name, but Lloyd's daughter.
How long did Samuel Chase live here?
He never did. He built it, they had the structure done, the inside wasn't finished, and he went broke. It was frequented by a lot of the better known people of that era because it was well, not a gambling house, but they came and played cards and drank till all hours and sort of caroused here.
This is a view of Maryland Street, looking towards the state capitol dome. Back to the sign. They're part of the Maryland State Representative buildings. We go to Senate stage. And there's the State House. Now we're looking at the front door of the State House here in Annapolis, Maryland.
My, what knockers.
Thank you, Doctor. You can see the brick streets here in Annapolis and the brick sidewalks just outside the state capitol. Charles Carroll birthplace.
That was really beautiful. Did you make it over to the Hammond Howard house? That's over on Maryland Avenue. You'd like that.
Maryland King George. Very nice.
Yeah, you would like that. That's a museum. It has everything in there that you would like to see.
You got a little museum down the end here, 77 Main. It'll give you a layout of the town as it was in the 1700s.
We got here relatively late this afternoon.
You gonna be here tomorrow?
No, we're going to be moving up to Baltimore.
A lot to see there.
Well, places to go and things to do if you're going to be around it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, but you probably should come down again when you can really spend a couple of days here.
This home was built in 1763 and was designed primarily by William Paca himself. The signer lived in this home until 1780, which is when William sold it after the death of his second wife, Anne Harrison Paca. The 2-acre pleasure garden behind Paca's house featured 5 terraces, a fish-shaped pond, and a wilderness. Paca's garden setting was the most picturesque of any place on our adventure thus far, including Middleton Place. In 1901, the home was turned into the Carvel Hall Hotel that completely hid the back of the original house and covered the garden. When the hotel faced demolition in 1964, the property was purchased and the home and garden were restored to their original 18th century appearance. Although it was less than 2 blocks away, Bob and I drove the Omni to the Chase Lloyd house, mainly because it was too hot to walk very far. Construction on this house began in 1769 for future signer Samuel Chase, but the Patriots sold it unfinished to Edward Lloyd IV in 1771. Lloyd finished the house in 1774 and it remained in his family until 1847. Even though Samuel Chase never lived in the historic home, it was still a place of interest for our tour. Bob and I were just happy that we were able to chase the painter away for a few minutes so we could capture our photographs. The next stop on our Annapolis visit was at perhaps the most historic building in the city, the Maryland State House, which has occupied the same site since 1779. Two extremely important historical events occurred within the walls of this building. On December 23, 1783, General George Washington resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army in the old Senate chamber. Less than a month later, on January 14, 1784, the Treaty of Paris was signed inside the building, which marked the official end of the Revolutionary War. The dome of the Maryland State House is the oldest and largest wooden dome of its kind in the United States. For nearly 200 years, the wooden dome was topped by an original Franklin lightning rod, which was constructed and grounded to Benjamin Franklin's specifications. There were no metal nails used in the construction of the dome, and to this day is still held together with wooden pegs reinforced by iron straps. The entire area surrounding the State House was beautiful, and it made it feel as though we took a step back in time. As far as the eye could see, there were brick sidewalks and brick streets. The only thing missing was the sound of horses as they trotted past the State House. With our equipment and documents in hand, Bob and I headed down the Duke of Gloucester Street in search of the Charles Carroll House. We chose to hike in the extreme heat because parking in downtown Annapolis was difficult to find. After we completed the 6-block walk, the two of us stood near the historic home in stunned silence. The place reminded Bob and I of Clint Eastwood's description of a chapter of the local VFW. Bob and I heard from one of the locals the Carroll House was being used as a halfway house, and because of that, we chose not to venture onto the property. This house was built in 1722, and on September 19, 1737, signer Charles Carroll of Carrollton was born there. For most of his life, Carroll either lived at this urban home or at his country estate, Dorregan Manor. The Carroll House sits on high ground overlooking Spa Creek and is the only surviving birthplace of a Maryland signer. With our scheduled stops finished for the day, Bob and I took our time as we hiked back to the Omni, which was still parked near the State House. At one of the street corners, the two of us got into a friendly conversation with two police officers, one of whom looked like Carol O'Connor from the TV show In the Heat of the Night. Once we were back inside the sweat-soaked Omni, Bob and I bid farewell to Annapolis and headed north towards Baltimore. We were exhausted from an entire day in the 100-plus degree heat and opted once again to stay in an air-conditioned motel. Mongo found a Motel 6 for $29.95 near Linthicum, Maryland, which was roughly 6 miles from downtown Baltimore. Following a quick dinner at Taco Bell, Bob and I cooled off in the motel's pool. Somehow, during our swim, the two of us struck up a conversation with the 15-year-old lifeguard on duty, and we spent the rest of the evening swimming and chatting with him. That seemed good because it gave Bob and I someone else to talk to about our travels besides ourselves. Once we were back in our room, The two of us talked about the next day, which included our much anticipated visit to Dorregan Manor, the country estate of Charles Carroll, and where the signer was laid to rest following his death in 1832. Roughly 5 weeks before our trip began, I had spoken with the current owner of Dorregan Manor, Philip Carroll, who was a direct descendant of the signer. Although Philip told me he might be on a trip to Europe during the time of our visit, he did grant us permission to see the signer's burial crypt located inside the family chapel alongside Dorregan Manor, and that was only because he didn't want to be the only person to cause our quest to fail. I was instructed by Philip to contact his farm foreman and set up the time for our scheduled visit, which was 12 noon on June 1st. Would Philip Carroll be at the historic home, or did he actually go to Europe? Bob and I had less than 14 hours to find out. Bob and I hope you've enjoyed this episode where we took you to the grave sites of three more signers of the Declaration of Independence: Carter Braxton, Richard Henry Lee, and Thomas Stone. Our next show will take you to a place most people will never get to visit, the final resting place of signer Charles Carroll of Carrollton at his home, Dorregan Manor. That visit was one of the highlights of our trip, and it'll be an episode you won't want to miss. Please do us a favor and subscribe to this channel and share this show with your friends on social media. It'll help our audience grow. And while you're at it, please hit that like button below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on our next episode of The Spirits of Independence. So long.